welcome to the Hail Mary NFL GPP podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about some GPP picks courtesy of Josh Shepardson at BChad50. And obviously, GPPs, you're looking for guys with huge ceilings, big-time upside, preferably low ownership as well. So you're looking for players that not a lot of people are on that can blow up and have monster games. A lot of times it's guys who haven't performed well recently, guys that aren't well-known names, things like that. So go ahead and start off here at the top. Sam Bradford for the Eagles, 27.25 Vegas team total, high over-under in this one, 49.5. Sam Bradford with a fair price on both sites, and as Josh mentions here, he was less than 3% owned in some tournaments that started on Thursday night. So this is a potential, breakout spot for Bradford, who has struggled a lot this season. But had 3 touchdown passes last week after another slow start, and 270 yards, 9.64 yards per attempt last week, and the worst pass defense in the entire league is the Saints, according to Pro Football Focus and according to Football Outsiders. So, as Josh mentions here, Rob Ryan, he's got to be friends with someone keeping this job, because this has been a perennial sieve on defense. They've been awful. So, Sam Bradford, under the radar, upside type of play here. Next up, another quarterback, Eli Manning. And Eli Manning's been great so far this season. Just 1 interception, just under 63% completion. And you've got a 25-point team total in this one against San Francisco, who's ranked 28th according to Football Outsiders and 29th according to Pro Football Focus against the pass there. And Eli Manning, 973 passing yards, has been solid. And even crazier, he's had a tie with Sam Bradford for the most drops at 14. So this is a guy who could have even better numbers so far this season. And, this is just a bad 49er secondary. You got to expect Eli Manning and company, Odell Beckham in particular. Even Ruben Randall had a huge game last week, a couple of solid games in a row. This is a guy that can put up points in a hurry. And, he's the other Manning. And, obviously his big brother not playing particularly great football right now. But Eli Manning, a guy that not a lot of people are on. Going to be a low-owned type of play this week for your GPPs. Next up, Jamal Charles, and the lowest owned of Bell, Devontae Freeman, and Charles here on the Thursday contest, as Josh mentions here, and likely going to have higher ownership on DraftKings and some other sites as well, where he's cheaper than Bell. But Bell's going to be the more popular play, and Charles has been a PPR monster. You got a nice high team total here for the Chiefs at 27.5 points. Jamal Charles is, like I said, just around, if not cheaper, than Le'Veon Bell. And you got Devontae Freeman, who's got pretty high ownership, but may end up splitting some carries now with Tevin Coleman back. So Charles, so far, 306 rushing yards with 4 touchdowns and 151 receiving yards and another touchdown, 20 catches so far this season. Chiefs big favorites here. And as we know, the Chiefs have had struggles keeping Alex Smith upright. So a lot of checkdowns, as always with Alex Smith, to guys like Jamal Charles in the passing game. And he has big-time upside because he gets red zone looks as well in the passing and the running game. So Jamal Charles, nice swerve off of the more popular Le'Veon Bell. Todd Gurley, last week, more so in the second half, but had a huge breakout, 19 carries for 146 yards against a very good run defense. Now, facing off against the Packers team, it's allowed 4.8 yards per attempt and 4 touchdowns so far. Been one of the worst rushing defenses in the league this season, and the Rams don't have a high team total, and the Packers could end up getting off to a big lead. But at the same time, Todd Gurley is going to be the focal point of this offense. This is an offense that doesn't have a go-to guy in the passing game. Gurley, obviously a guy who can run for volume, and he looked incredible last week, very cheap across the industry. It's probably going to be the final week that you see him cheap, assuming he has another decent game. And it's hard not to anticipate one against this team here. Next up, Julio Jones, obviously a guy with some big time upside, and coming off I won't say a disappointing week necessarily. Yes, statistically it was, but the Falcons jumped out to a 42-0 lead on the Texans, so you didn't need a lot from your stud wide receiver in that kind of game script. So, guy that's going to probably see lower ownership than he rightfully should in this matchup here against Washington, who, as we know, the strength of their defense is their run defense. Secondary, one of the worst in football. They're also down 2 corners this game. So Julio Jones, a guy going to see probably his lowest ownership of the season this week, but that's probably a mistake. A guy you definitely want to have some exposure to in your tournaments. Next up, Jordan Matthews, guy you could pair with the aforementioned Sam Bradford. And Jordan Matthews, another guy in a fine matchup. We mentioned how the Saints have the worst pass defense in the league, according to, the two main statistics sites. So obviously, Jordan Matthews, a guy who's a deep threat. He runs out of the slot a lot. And as Denny Carter mentioned on our slate breakdown earlier, this is a Saints defense that's also the worst in the league against slot receivers. And 85% of Jordan Matthews' snaps and routes run come out of the slot. So that's a dreamy matchup for a guy who has been a disappointment at times this year. Next up, Mike Evans. We saw last week that Vincent Jackson had the big breakout game, not Mike Evans, but Mike Evans was locked in a really tough matchup against Josh Norman, who's now one of the best corners in all of football. He had a couple interceptions as well. So now you flip it on the other end, and you realize that Mike Evans is the volume guy. He's a deep threat as well. And maybe some other people chase the points with Vincent Jackson. That's not to say that he's a terrible play, but Mike Evans is the guy. He's the focal point of this offense. And don't be surprised to see him easily see double-digit targets in this one in a fine matchup against the Jacksonville secondary that's really been, average at best this season. Final guy is a guy that I love in all formats, Charles Clay, coming off a big performance last week. Could have been even bigger if he didn't have a touchdown called back late in the fourth quarter, but this is a guy who has been taking on a bigger role with some injuries in this offense. And you got Sammy Watkins and Percy Harvin both banged up. Not sure of the status of either of those guys for this week, but Tyrod Taylor has a lot of faith in Charles Clay. He gets red zone looks. He throws the ball down the field to him. He's a go-to on third down. So this is a guy you can expect to get a lot of targets. Got a nice high floor, too, so not a bad cash game option for you either against the Tennessee team that's actually worst in the NFL, according to Football Outsiders, against the tight end. So that's going to wrap things up for the GPP picks. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Any questions for Josh about any of these plays? He's at BChad50. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.